Oh, we're live. Hi, Damon. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you were, you started your career in UPS. I listened to this other podcast. You talk about your high school era, like working at the UPS, like it was fast speed and everything. Maybe we could start from, where do you come from, and like what are the core lessons that you learned early on in your career before becoming, the CFO of Tableau, DataRobot, or now CEO of Caliper.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, again, thanks for having me. So earlier in my career, as you mentioned, I started working at United Parcel Service nights and weekends when I was in high school. All through college, I think we had to be in the morning at 4 a.m. to supervise the individuals loading and unloading the trucks to deliver packages.
Mhm.
What I learned from that experience was one, just a sense of responsibility. At 18, I was one of the youngest supervisors at UPS, and managing individuals in in their 20s and 30s who were coming in every day, working hard to deliver on deliver customers their packages. And that experience really taught me like a sense of urgency. I think everything, every package had to be delivered every single day to get through the process. I think quality was important, at UPS. So making sure the right packages got the right trucks is the same kind of concept now when you're, delivering software. Quality is paramount and important for your customers. And then, just got me a head start on being able to be a leader and a manager in the kind of corporate world. When I started at Price Waterhouse after college, I'd already had 5 or 6 years of supervisory experience, and was immediately able to climb through the ranks.
Mm. I wonder, so like I really like that, like, and then I also feel like it sounds like the military training background. So like you like wake up at 4 and like managing people older than you. And what about we talk about like, I feel like you work at PwC before becoming the staff of Tableau, like which is like I feel like the defining moment of your career. And why don't we talk about like, what were some lessons that you've learned at PwC that you kind of took to become a CFO later?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would highly recommend anyone who went to school for business and accounting to choose to go to one of the big four accounting firms. They particularly Price Waterhouse, gave me a ton of experience to a lot of different industries. I started my career working in the Jacksonville, Florida office, working on companies like Armor Holding, who were kind of preparing the U.S. Military for the Iraq War, things like armoring the Humvees, to packing parachutes, to the SAPI plates that the Marines would wear to protect their the middle of their body, their ceramic plates like armor. And I believe all that experience really of seeing all those different companies in financial services and other things really helped me be a better CFO when I ultimately joined Tableau and moved directly into kind of an operating role at a tech company. Having that broader experience of seeing hundreds of different companies over the years and the different ways that they manage their business and the risks. I learned a lot about risks related to interest rate in the 2008 financial crisis. That was ultimately very helpful in kind of having a strong kind of treasury function at Tableau.
Totally. Can I ask, like, okay, so maybe we start with like the Tableau section because I feel like that like since like I feel like you run their finance in general, your responsibility, including let's say investor relations, deal desk, source, procurement, and travel. Like, why don't we talk about like what is a day to day like as a CFO somewhere, and how is software different than like a traditional company?
Yeah, sure. So, I think in the role of CFO at a tech company, at least for the CFOs at Tableau and also DataRobot, you have so much exposure to the rest of the business. I mean, at Tableau, not only did I manage the finance organization, but the corporate IT reported into me. So all the decisions around the company around what software did we implement across the organization, whether it be dev or marketing or all those different functions. The internal IT team delivered those. Also things like real estate and workplace, where we were helping, people welcome new employees into the office or guests, all those different functions, deal desk, deal strategy. You get so much exposure in the CFO's office to those different functions, as well as being a good trusted business partner, along with the CEO to kind of review business plans. I think one of the great things that Adam Selipsky brought in from Amazon when he joined Tableau in 2016 was, a rigorous, process of, reviewing each of our major departments, results of their business on a monthly basis. We'd have, the typical 6-page narrative and go through kind of a business review. And that experience really helped me kind of see a broader array of the company than maybe, most CFOs who are just narrowly focused on things like, FP&A and investor relations. Really at Tableau, we had our, we're kind of a trusted business partner for the rest of the organization.
I wonder, okay, maybe we could talk about as a business, since a lot of our listeners are either founder or investors, maybe we start from the founder side. So let's say I'm a CEO of a startup. How, what do I need to know about my finance? What are, besides the 3 form, I don't know how people call it, but let's say beside the basics, what are the most important part of my business that I need to pay attention to?
Yeah. So, for me, whether you're at, a $1 billion revenue company like Tableau, or you're a $100 million revenue company like DataRobot, or a, $100,000 startup, I think the most important thing is understanding your cash flows. I think you don't rely just on your finance department to help you understand kind of where that's trending. I think a lot of CEOs, the reason why a lot of tech companies get into trouble is they receive venture funding and they go out and immediately try to hire as fast as possible. And I think you have to understand there's things that happen when you hire. One, you commit to a kind of recurring expense stream. You have merit for those employees, you have benefits, you have all these indirect IT costs related to those employees. And a lot of times if you hire more senior individuals, if let's say you're a late stage private company, technology company, as you hire more senior, more talent in your organization, they're going to want to build out kind of teams to drive their strategic initiatives. And you have to kind of plan and understand the downstream impacts of, when you hire a VP, it's much different than hiring a manager, because that VP needs to build out a team. And they're, if you don't allow them to build out a team, they're not going to feel like they could be successful, right? And so you really have to make sure that you're ready to make not only that particular individual investment, but are you ready to make all the investments that are downstream from that? The 2 or 3 directors they may need to operate, and all the downstream implications of that. And so I think understanding your cash flows, understanding your burn rate. The one thing I look very, very closely at is how much new ARR are we generating compared to how much cash are we burning in any particular quarter. And I think that burn ratio is probably the number one thing that kind of a first-time founder or first-time operator of a private technology company, if they don't understand that concept, they're going to get themselves into a lot of trouble.
What is the right burn rate? Because if you're not spending money, you're growing too slow. But if you're burning money, you're dead. So how do you think about what's the correct amount to spend and what rate of growth?
Yeah, I think it depends how early you are. As you mature, your ability to invest more will decline. So if a late stage private company, you probably want to be burning something similar to your ARR. So 1 to 2, 1.2 to 1, or 1 to 1 ratio, versus if you're an early stage company, you might be burning 2 or 3 to 1 because you're having to develop the initial product. And so your research and development as a percent of your bookings is going to be, maybe upside down. Where if you're a late stage company, you might only be investing 25 to 35% in R&D, and so the rest of your investment will go to sales and marketing and G&A. So it will evolve, but I think I've always seen kind of a 2 to 1 kind of profile at an earlier stage, or maybe 3 to 1, and then at the late stage, 1.2, 1.3 to 1 is probably. And then when you're public, you want to get as close to rule of 40 as you can, which is, your cash flows, plus your growth rate.
Totally. I wonder, let's say, for since you worked at Tableau for over 7 years, you started as a director and you ended as a CFO. So, um, in terms of like career transition, what is like the main skill that you feel like CFO should have? Like, and I guess like how do you kind of coach yourself into that position? What separate you from like the rest of everybody else that you feel like?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the things I personally brought to the table was kind of a bias for action. I think that
Mhm.
got ingrained in me as
Mhm.
early as UPS, where just you had to kind of constantly be moving, constantly driving your team and iterating and moving people between trucks to make sure that you got the right balance of talent to how quickly the packages were coming in. It's
Mhm.
that same thing when when I left Tableau, we had 850 people in my department between finance and IT and other functions, and finding the right talent to put in the right place. So problem solving, bias for action. I think if you're in a technology industry and you're moving fast, you have to really be a little bit of a technologist yourself. You have to understand what's going to drive efficiency in your organization. You got to be willing to take risks to implement new systems, to constantly be making your overall business, not just your finance team, but the other functions, whether marketing or development, make them more efficient. And a lot of times those investments, you don't have a crystal ball whether they're all going to work out, but you have to kind of diligently understand the needs of the business, map out solutions that can help them, and constantly iterate and challenge yourself to think outside of the box. If you're just static and focused on accounting and FP&A and controlling the business, you're probably going to sit more at a VP level and never kind of make the bridge to kind of a trusted business partner.
Mm. Can you like elaborate more about like moving fast, bias for action? Obviously, like you just mentioned about like, I guess like a lot of it is like kind of predicting what the business need, like actively looking at the burn rate and like the business functions and then like maybe informing the rest of the team and stuff like that. So I guess like what when it comes to day to day, like what would be your maybe like tracking mechanism on like different factors or like I'm sure you have like you mentioned about like 850 people under you, like how do you kind of like manage a big team and really get to the core of the information that you need?
Sure. I'll handle those two questions separately. So the first was really about, what are the specific things that you do to kind of make that, that team more efficient? I think, for me, it was about, reviewing kind of the business on a real-time basis. I mean, every morning, I'll just give one example. I would look at our headcount dashboard to see how many hires that we had made in a particular, day from the prior day. And, what is our, and rather than just sitting back and saying, oh, great, we're going to save some money because we're under hiring this quarter, I would be nudging different department heads. Hey, did you know you realize you're behind on hiring? You're not going to hit your hiring goal. Is that going to leave you a gap in maybe your sales plan of being able to hit your quota because you don't have enough sales reps? And so kind of that when I say bias for action, it's not sitting back and just reporting the news, but really actively alerting the other departments who may not have, a team that can pull data on a regular basis, or they're just busy with other initiatives that they may not know that they're, behind on lead flow or behind on hiring or whatever, behind on their bookings compared to what what we anticipated them tracking for a particular quarter. So, being very involved in that, I meeting weekly with the sales team around the forecast and what's been booked that week, what deals are in the pipeline, how can the executives lean in and help those deals. So that's when I say bias for action, those are some examples of things that we would do. On managing a large team, I think there's a number of elements. I had a wonderful group of direct reports who were very, very talented. So those evolved over the years through people adapting to the scale of the business. Some people had to opt out and choose to go stay at a smaller technology company, and then the very talented leaders that we had in the finance organization and IT organization grew with the company and manage large teams. I think, my personal style is if someone's, having success and performing really well, it's kind of more of a hands off and, like just kind of mentor them. And then if they're struggling, it's leaning in and doing more inspection. And so I kind of manage different people differently. And then some people just like more regular check-ins. I had some great, really talented people who really wanted to get to bounce things off of you every week. And that's fine. And then I had some people who, hey, I can run my business, and I would meet with them once a month and talk more high level with them. So it's kind of adapting to whatever the needs of your leadership team and being flexible enough that you're not mandating the way that you work with them, but you're adapting to how they prefer to work with their leader.
I love that. I feel like, taking proactive action and then like really manage the team as like the CFO to like collaborate with like different functions from like product to like, sales and everybody else. Before we're diving into your business, I want to ask one last question on like the management thing, because running a big company is like very different than like creating a startup, right? How do you set up KPI for yourself as a CFO? Like, is that like, obviously I don't really know if it's like how much money, obviously it's not how much money we save, but it's how much business we grew. But how do you kind of like tie your function to the revenue target or like the business growth and like kind of like reflect it to the rest of the team? Because like, I'm sure you're collaborating with the CEO, the COO, the CMO, the CPO, CRO. How do you kind of like spend the time and like really translate your KPI to the rest of the universe?
Yeah. So, one, as the CFO's office, I manage the overall KPIs. We call them OKRs, which is a great term that I think some of the objectives and key results. And so, I manage that process. The FP&A team kind of help the rest of the company develop their particular goals, track those with data. And so you're supporting the entire team, usually the finance organization, unless you have kind of a dedicated CEO's office that does that kind of stuff. Most companies are going to lean on their finance team to manage that process. And so not only did we did that, so we helped every company, that would be, marketing, lead flow, sales, bookings, R&D, delivery, all those things we would track in a massive kind of spreadsheet. And we'd have a monthly business review with Adam about, green, yellow, red, about how each one of those functions were tracking. Then on the finance specifically, or my organization, because I had IT, finance, back office, deal desk, around deal desk, it was about, how many transactions can we process per deal desk rep? So being more efficient as an organization, accounting and those kind of functions were really focused on, how do we shorten the close period so that we can provide information to internal stakeholders and, the street faster. And so how do we have an 8-day close or 7-day close? In IT, it was about how do we manage these big, transformational projects? What are the delivery timelines of those? Are we meeting those specific milestones? We had a big, quote to cash project my last year. Are we meeting the milestones that we had on delivery of this particular functionality to the business? And so those are kind of some of the things that I focused on. I would say, from a CFO's office, I spent about 30% of my time in IT. 30% of my time in kind of deal strategy, deal desk, order processing, that kind of world, and about 30% of my time in actual finance, mostly with investor relations. And then, accounting and FP&A were handled by some really strong leaders that are now both actually CFOs themselves. The two VPs I had under me have both recently been named CFO themselves.
I really like what you said about like, basically like, I guess, I feel like I hear a lot of like the collaboration as well as like, constant like exam of your own like big picture. And I wonder, okay, let's start with your current company. Like, you created Caliper based off your experience as a CFO. Why don't we start with like what's a product and then how it's, helping the C-suite CFO specifically?
Yeah. So when I was at Tableau, one of my, my function within IT had managed the public cloud infrastructure for the company. And originally, back in 2016, when I, was first named CFO, we just began a transition from being a kind of data center company to moving our internal workloads to the public cloud. We later transitioned our customers from a on-premises version of the product to leading with the cloud-first strategies, which that dramatically increased our cloud spend. And then we implemented other products like data management, which had a different cloud cost profile than our traditional Tableau products. And I think through all those experiences, what I learned was managing the cloud is very, very complex. When you take away the purchase requisition process of buying a server and really allow a developer to turn it on and off with with a click of a button on their mouse, that can dramatically change the variability of your spend. And so we had to do a lot of analysis around those major events to help bring down the cost to serve our customers from a cloud perspective, to eliminate waste in our organization, to understand unit economics of our data management product and why it was costing more. And we actually changed our pricing as a result of a lot of that analysis, where we started charging customers for capacity, because what we realized is that product was not the number of users wasn't as important to the cost profile as how much data they were putting through the product. And so all those things led me to kind of build a lot of custom things. And I said, well, why don't we just take that custom work that we built and really apply those lessons learned to help other companies be able to kind of manage their cloud without any kind of major lift. And so instead of taking 2 months to kind of build all that out like I had to do at Tableau, what if a customer could do that in 15 minutes? And so we've provided kind of a high-level, high-performance analytics product with all the data engineering around your cloud and other tools like Snowflake and Datadog. And so it really helps anyone in the CTO's office or CFO's office better manage their cloud and get better visibility into their spend.
Yeah, totally. You want to showcase the product? I mean, we can if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think let me so actually show a little bit of a demo.
Okay. This
Awesome.
is not sponsored. This is just literally I saw the demo. I thought it was really cool just because I know that people are spending a lot on cloud, but nowadays I assume people spend on GPU. But since this week DeepSeek is happening, I guess people are not spending money on GPU anymore. But how do you think about I'll piggyback the question later, but let's showcase.
Yeah, so you have the ability to very rapidly choose to kind of drill into your spend. In this case, we're looking at EC2 compute. I can pull up and see how much of my costs were covered by a savings plan in a particular period of time. I can look at those costs maybe by day and say, hey, look at I've got this particular spend. I've covered most of it by a savings plan, but on these particular days, you have to use on demand. I can put a label on here of how much we spend any particular day on this kind of test environment, or maybe I can say of a period, I could see that I've spent 40% on demand as opposed to 59% on a savings plan in a particular day. You have the ability to do things like look at your costs on a heat map. And I think this is always a great way of seeing kind of anomalies for customers of what happened in this particular day, and then you can drill in by just clicking on the graph. It's very interactive, and seeing all the way down to the the machines that were used in that particular day, and what's who's used those. So in this particular example, it was a sandbox, so we had stood up a test environment for a release that we were planning. So that's just a kind of a quick taste of what you can do and the power of that. And so it really provides kind of a rich analytical experience for customers to be able to analyze their spend in kind of new and interesting ways.
I think honestly, I feel like when I look at this, I thought this is perfectly for any founder and investors. Even just how you're spending money, it's really, that's just the visualization tool is really important, just because people don't really translate into their mind what does this budget means, or how much you're actually spending, besides visualizing it, because when you see a number, it's it could be anything, and you don't really understand how much portion of that number is kind of translating into your revenue, or potential just burns. How do you think about I guess what is the biggest burn of most of cloud data / AI company these days?
Yeah. So, I've seen a number of, we've got probably 20 paid customers, and, probably
Mhm.
100 other customers have tried the product since we launched last year. I think if you go through and look at, many of them shared their information with me as we're doing demos with their data. And I think some of the common things that I see are, customers who turn on machines to do, tests, and then they don't really turn them off. And, we had one company who literally had went bankrupt recently, and they had rented a machine for $35 a day. They're a small startup, struggling with funding, and had left it on for 6 months. So that was, a $12,000 annual savings just by, turning that off, which we were able to find for them in like the first demo with their data. You see a lot of storage where they haven't upgraded from GP2 to GP3 as an example, where they could be saving significant amounts by just doing kind of simple steps. We analyze like their company's sandbox environments or test environments, and we notice that they're on 24/7, like on the weekends and nights. That's a quick way to save 30-40%. Sometimes if you're managing those test environments, spinning them up and spinning them down, that test environment will be about half of your production environment. If you're not managing them well, I'm seeing some companies that their test environment is 1.5 times their production environment. And so if you think about that, you're just wasting, it's pure waste. Like no one is, no customer or developer is logging in on Saturday night at 11 p.m. to do a test usually. And so spin those up and spin those down. And if you take those simple steps, those 2 or 3 simple steps, within a 30-minute phone call, we can help a company save 30% on their cloud.
Wow.
And if you're, let's say you're, a small startup and you've raised $4 million and your cloud spend is $1 million a year, you save 30%. That's one more developer, maybe 2 more developers that you can hire or one salesperson, one developer to make you grow faster and kind of, rather than just wasting it with, the public cloud provider. So I think the other thing we help them do is find surprises. So we look at spend by hour. And a lot of times you'll see these spikes, and sometimes it's because of a configuration change within AWS. And if you find it quickly, you can just turn it off. If you don't find it quickly, you might burn through $10,000, $20,000 before someone notices it in the variance analysis that your FP&A team does, and say, why did your cloud spend go up 2x this month? Oh, it was because of that one mistake that we made, and no one caught it for 3 or 4 weeks.
I want to say hi to the audience. Hi, Steven. Okay, so I wonder, I guess like, how do you, I guess like another question I had was about the CFO suite, right? So like, how do you manage? How much do you spend on human? How much do you spend on cloud? How much do you spend on other stuff? Like, is there like a formula there? But since like every startup is different, like, you work at multiple different companies, like, I feel like Tableau is different than DataRobot and then your own company today. Uh, I guess like, how much do you think about the startup spend on each different sector? Also for like human component, let's say you mentioned about like you could hire 1 more or 2 more engineers with call it like $1 million budget. How much incentive is it from stock, and how much of it should be coming from cash, and like how do you kind of construct this kind of stuff?
Yeah,
Is this
sure.
like a CFO's job, or is this like a human resources, or is this like a combination?
I think everything you kind of described was was probably initially CFO at Tableau, and then as we hired a strong, a head of human resources, yes, they ultimately took over the compensation programs. But early on in the company's history, prior to us being a $1 billion company, some of that was managed by the finance organization, and so I do have some experience with kind of composition of compensation. I would say to your question of like what is the arc of a financial statements and how do you best allocate your resources? I think for sales it's very programmatic. So you tie their OTEs, so their base compensation plus their commissions to a based off the type of salesperson, whether they're field sales or inside sales, to a quota. So, if they're inside sales, their quota is going to be usually 5 times their variable comp. And so you build out a sales plan of, here's the number that we're trying to track to, and this is how many reps that we would need to achieve that objective, assuming you had, enough marketing and demand generation happening that would, give the salesperson enough lead flow to hit those numbers. And so the sales team is very programmatic. Then you have ratios for managers and overlays like, solution engineers, customer success, based off how many salesperson you have or how many accounts you have and things like that. So that's very programmatic. That's almost like a big math exercise. And there's a lot of tools out there that can help you do that better. On the R&D front, that's really more of an art. So then, for them, you have to understand, what can the team deliver. Kind of in the way that we did it was, we said, here's your existing headcount. Let's say you had 20 people in this particular R&D team. We'd ask them to describe, everything being equal, what can this 20-person team deliver if they got no more investment? And then we'd say, well, if you got 10% more investment, so if you got 2 more heads, what could you deliver this particular year? And if you got 30% more investment, what could you deliver? And then what you do, and then you get maybe you have 10 R&D teams across the organization, and then you understand each one of those teams. What could they deliver? How valuable could that be for customers? And you get a lot of people from sales and marketing and product and customer success all listen to those proposals about what the team could build. And then you make a decision on, like, hey, which are the most important investments? And then you choose to green light those. One team to get 30% headcount, and then maybe one team stays flat because the things that they described being able to accelerate weren't as valuable to customers as the things that you thought they could. So that's how we did it. On the any questions on that before I jump into the sales comp or the total compensation question?
No, I thought that was so good. Like, I feel like you help us understand what a CFO do day to day. I feel like it's a myth, just because I feel like CFO, it's not like any other product leader. Like, you hear about the CEO, the COO, CMO, like everybody's out there talking about stuff, but like you rarely hear about CFO, career journey, as well as like your vision. But like, I feel like it's one of the most important component in a business, because like the money side of things is your lifeblood, and then you have to also take care of the investor relation. That's another piece I wanted to ask too later, but I'll let you finish.
Yeah. So on equity compensation, really, that's all market driven. So if you're doing it the right way, you should be looking at what's the market rate for cash compensation. So we do a lot of benchmarking. So we get there's a lot of external service providers that can provide you for the Seattle market. Here's the cash compensation. Here's the equity consideration. I think if you're an early stage startup, obviously you're cash poor and equity rich, and you're probably going to be, if you're anything like me, it's hey, you might give 1 or 2% to an employee who is willing to take a little bit less cash compensation than they otherwise would have if they were in a late stage company and the shares were liquid. And so, but I think for a public company and a late stage private, 100% of those compensation tables is based off market factors. And then with the investors, I think for your equity as a whole, your equity pool, it really has to be aligned with how much return on capital are you generating as a business. And so one thing that I think is really not well understood within the technology industry in particular is what is a good return on capital, and how much dilution am I willing to give up to my employee base, and cause shareholder pain. How much return am I going to generate on that? And I think you see so many companies that are growing rapidly, but they're destroying shareholder value. And if there's some great companies out there that are technology that are wise with the amount of dilution they have, but just because a company's performing well, if they're giving a massive amount of stock away, they're just diluting shareholders more and more. And the ultimate value, even though the share price has gone up, the percent ownership and things like that, can sometimes come back to bite that, in a world where there's a sharp market correction and people realize how many shares have been granted to employees. And you see that with some of the high flying names over the last couple of years that have, lost 80% of their value.
Mm. I wonder, so like since you mentioned about like, how much dilution you want to give, or like to also like it may cause like shareholder pain. Speaking of shareholders, I wonder, since like uh when back in time before a company goes to public or getting acquired, like there are a tons of investors, right? Like how do you, like, since you lead the investor relations in the past, and like what does that entail? Like, how frequently do you have to like report to the shareholder, and like does every quarter just need to be completely perfect? What if you have like a down quarter? Like how do you kind of like translate that into like an investor report, and how do you balance the long-term goal and short-term goal? Just because you may spend a lot of money this month, but next month you're gonna get like amazing return, or not next month, but maybe let's say next year. How do you kind of like balance these like long-term and short-term situation?
Yeah. So, well, I think on the investor front, when you're a public company, there's a very defined process for how you typically engage. So you'll have a quarterly earnings call in which, your team will prepare for you, both the actual results and then your financial guidance.
Oh,
That's
I have a question there. Sorry. For those quarterly calls, like for the IPO of the company, obviously, I mean, I personally have listened to part of the, let's say, like, I don't know, Twitter annual report or something in the past, but what am I supposed to listen to? Like, like what are things that I need to pay attention? Because those are like super long calls. I don't understand like which part you need to pay attention. Though now we have like ChatGPT or something, but as a CFO, like what are things that you feel like people should like tune into?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that you prepare for as a CFO and CEO.
Mhm.
So those are generally the two individuals who are speaking at those. One, you have a script that describes the results of the quarter. The CFOs is probably more financially driven. The CEOs is kind of giving some, maybe summaries of large customer lands or major initiatives. There, what you want to do is the CEOs kind of script. You want to make sure that you have a good understanding of like what is driving the business and where are we going from a strategy perspective. And so we spent a lot of time helping Adam, kind of summarize what's kind of major initiatives we're going through that particular period of time, and what the next few months is going to look like, or the next few years. On the finance side, it's really important to accurately summarize the results, which is that's kind of the boring part of the call. And then the most important part is in what you prepare the most for is the 20 questions that you get after you finish your prepared remarks. You don't know what those questions are. They're not submitted in advance.
Mhm.
Your head of investor relations kind of you go through all your financial results. I had a wonderful Derek Wong, who was our head of investor relations, did an unbelievable job preparing Adam and I for the tough questions. Like if we had a soft, maybe one region internationally, or maybe our subscription percentage was slightly lower than we expected or slightly more, how did you understand the sensitivity of that? How well could you talk to that? Maybe hiring was a little light. How's that going to impact future results? Whatever that theme is, you have to identify that to yourself, because you have to be prepared for those questions. And so, amazingly, for the 12 or 12 quarters or something like that I was the public company CFO before we were bought by Salesforce, we were really well prepared for those particular questions and really understand what were going to be the controversial questions. And so I would say the Q&A is probably where you want to listen the most if you're wanting to make a investment decision. Now, stepping back, I think the most important thing, and I really would always, so then after the call, you'd have private callbacks with all the investors, and they would ask you, instead of just asking one question, they'd ask you 20 or so questions. So you do the analyst first on the first night, and then so they can get all the research reports out, and then the next morning you would do 20 or 30 calls with actual individual investors. And I would say with investors, the big focus is finding investors who think long term, have low portfolio turnover, believe in your company and your leadership team. Don't make, snap decisions based off, quarter by quarter fluctuations. Sales, I can tell you right now, like no matter how good a salesperson you are, being able to predict whether a deal comes in on the 31st of the month or the first day of the next year or the next quarter is very hard. And sometimes it's out of like control of your team, or even the buyer sometimes, can't get it through an approval process because of, for whatever reason. And so there's variability in earnings. I think taking a step back and just thinking about holistically the business is the most important way. On a private company, investor relations is very different, right? So you're doing less inform on a quarterly basis, and you're doing more, outreach and education about your value proposition and your long-term strategic plan. And so, I spent a number of, we haven't raised capital from venture capital, but I've met with probably 20 or 30 different venture funds to educate them on our business in case we ultimately decide to raise capital. And that's more about kind of strategy and kind of what we're trying to build and those type of things.
I wonder, I really like what you said about like, there are, there's the sensitive part, and then like your team member would prepare you guys for this. And then also, like there are going to be like quarters that are going up and down, and then like you have to address these like important questions to the investors. I wonder, so like since like you have been in the CFO seat before, now you're the CEO, what would you say is like the most like surprising part for you, like as a CEO of a company versus a CFO in the past?
I mean, for me, the most challenging aspects of being in this role are really, before it was more of a support role for the sales team, where I was an executive sponsor on a lot of the big professional services firms or the big banks, where I had relationships where you're coming in at the end of a process and building executive relationships, but you're not necessarily actively working deals. I think being a CEO of a startup, you have to be very hands-on on all kind of customer related activities. So whether it's a demo with a customer or you're walking them through how the first month of the product has gone, you have to be present at those meetings. You have to listen with intent and understand what problems are they solving with their and then you have to translate that. So the hardest things for me are really working through that sales execution process, which is very if you haven't done that before, which I had not, it's kind of, you have to learn and iterate. And then how challenging it is in this new world around marketing. I think the old way of doing cold calling and things like that is very or cold email, cold outreach with AI tools. People have really kind of turned away from really responding to that, and so you really have to do kind of the network effect of having relationships that get you introduced to companies to be able to get a response. And so building that network or expanding your network at a fast enough clip that you can identify new leads is kind of important. And so constantly attending networking events and growing your network is super, super important.
For sure. I like, why do you still work? I feel like you're already achieved like financial success. You don't really need to work. Like, what's the motivation there?
Well, I've worked really hard my whole life. I just love company building. So this is a lot of fun. Honestly, I'm not doing it for the financial outcome at this point in my life. Like you mentioned, I think it's more about, how do you build value for, your team members? Can you solve customer problems? It's been, we've been doing it about a year and a half, and I come to work every day and it's kind of fun. And it's all new, versus, would I go back and do a CFO public company seat? Probably not at this point in my career, even though, the financial outcome would be probably 100 times more than I'm making with my small business. But I wouldn't enjoy it as much. So I think, I just love meeting with customers and helping people and staying involved in the technology industry. And I'm hopeful that we will grow and prosper and we'll get some value for the employees that have contributed to the company. But it's an uncertain future when you're kind of early stage startup. You control your own destiny, but unfortunately, that destiny is uncertain.
Love that. What's I guess like another questions I had was like, since like you already been through the journey and then like I'm sure like you have like mentees that like everybody asks you either for, I don't know, a finance job, or like the startup founder may ask you advice for, building their company. What would be your advice for, let's say, the people who are building the companies, like other startup founders trying to manage their finance? And, I'm sure you invest in some of them. Like, how do you, like, what are the stuff that people consistently ask you?
Yeah. Well, I hear, I went to a WTIA event the other day, and I heard a lot of people talking about gaming the system and, and kind of short-term thinking. I would, and I have a number of people that I've mentored recently over the last couple of years. I would say 100% focus on your business. You're going to be much more successful if you focus on your customers and solving real business problems than you are about manipulating your stock price or your earnings, or even focusing on capital raising. While it's important sometimes, being prudent with your financials and having enough runway and managing your business well is probably a better use of your time. And then the capital, you'll have, if you do that really, really well, which we're trying to do at Caliper, you will, in my belief, you will ultimately reap the rewards. You'll have people chasing you as an investor, as opposed to you spending all your time, really focus on that, manipulation of those outcomes. Not in a negative way, manipulation, but just you're too narrowly focused on that, on capital raising or earnings and stuff like that. And so manage focus on your business, focus on, making data-driven decisions. And then I would say, don't be afraid to make quick decisions when it comes to, personnel. If people aren't working out, make the tough decision quickly. I think waiting, particularly at a company where you're burning a lot of cash, if you're early stage, you can't wait 2 or 3 months to solve a problem with performance. And so, encourage that person to, find other ways to be successful, either internally or externally, as quickly as possible. Is kind of some things that I, really, really think are important for first-time founders.
I really like what you said about like focusing on the right thing instead of like focusing on like tracking the system, but you actually focus on the business on its own. I wonder, so like I didn't start with like personal development questions, but like I wonder, since like your UPS era to now, like who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to career development?
I had a number of mentors. So at Price Waterhouse, there was a gentleman, Wally Human, who was out of our Charlotte office, who, I worked for him on a large account. And he really served as a mentor. I had a lot of great opportunities early in my career to leave Price Waterhouse and go take, director of financial reporting or controller role. And, Wally really, helped me make sure that I was being patient with those opportunities, and ultimately, led to me, getting an opportunity to move out to Seattle to work on an IPO. Here in Seattle, there's a gentleman named Stephen Somerville who actually introduced me to the CFO at Tableau. I had an opportunity to move to Chicago to be a partner at Price Waterhouse, and there was or stay in Seattle and take this opportunity with Tableau. And he helped me kind of think through that decision, and didn't really, not only didn't think about the self-interest of like, oh, we need to keep this guy at Price Waterhouse because he's a good employee. He was, gave me the pros and cons and why he thought this other role would be a great outcome. And ultimately it led to the succession of the CFO. So I think there's gentlemen like that. My former CFO at Tableau, Tom Walker, Adam Silipsky, all very great mentors and leaders. Mark Hawkins from Salesforce, who I brought over to DataRobot as our chairman of our board. All great mentors and people that I really value their opinion.
You mentioned you brought someone from the board, from from Salesforce to the DataRobot board. Can we talk about like, what is it? I guess like how do people actually form a board member relationship? And obviously we have like a lot of board member on our show before, but like I actually never hear about how they got to be a board member. I mean, I heard there's like a recruiting system for that, but like obviously you mentioned about you brought like a mentor slash friend to your company as a board, but how does that typically happen?
Yeah, so for a lot of companies that are early stage, your board is going to be predominantly your VCs
Mhm.
who have a direct investment. But then
Mhm.
we were preparing to take the company public at DataRobot. That was why I was brought in, and so we were trying to strengthen the board from just having investors on it to also having operators. And so we brought some great leaders from across different aspects of the industry. Mark Hawkins, who's a CFO at CFO at Salesforce. I
Mhm.
recruited him to be on the board. We recruited Dev Acharia from MongoDB, who was the CEO there. We recruited a number of other individuals. Amit from Zscaler, and I think he's now CEO of DigiCert, I think is the name of his new company. So a lot of great leaders from different aspects, whether it be R&D, CEO, CFO. Kind of the strengthen the outside perspectives of how to operate the company, and they were all at a tremendous value. I mean, we ultimately didn't take the company public just given the rising interest rate environment, but I think those individuals add a lot of value. We strengthened the operating abilities of the company, and then Debanjan later took over CEOs and doing quite well from what I understand.
Mm. I wonder, I really love that, like, you remembers, like, I really like what you said about, like, instead of having full-on investors, but, like, bringing board member with, like, actual experiences, and then you brought out, like, industry players that are, like, in different companies, so it gave, like, different perspectives, and, I wonder, so, like, what would you say would be one skill that, like, a good CFO should have?
Um, I think technical skills. I think you want to be data driven. You want to be able to kind of understand data. I think from a soft skills perspective, I think you want to be. I think you have to have a kind of tough backbone and be able to say say no, and build relationships that you can ultimately have a trusted relationship where you can tell somebody now's not the right time, because everybody wants more resources and more headcount, and so you have to make those decisions judiciously. And sometimes you have to push back against the CEO or some other or the board around those investments because they may not understand the underlying data and what's happening at the company. There's been many times where we've had to freeze hiring or something like that in a particular period of time where the CFO was office was recommending those decisions, and you had to bring other people along, and so strong backbone is super important in this role. You have to say no to unusual contract requests from customers or deals that are priced at too high a discount, and you'll lose some of those deals, and hopefully you win some of the other ones that and sometimes you win the deal that you push back on. Maybe it's a termination for convenience or some other unusual contract term where you're the last line of defense of the company to say we're not going to do that, and you have to make really really strong decisions and data driven decisions around that.
You mentioned about like I guess like like the annual planning, like how like people's hat count and stuff. What does annual planning look like? So, just because I mean, I only understand from like a marketing sales perspective, since like our company primarily work with like marketing department of different companies. But like, so for example, let's say 25 like plan, are we gonna make it in December or in October? How does like company go through these different cycles on that stuff? And then like who exactly is making decisions on how much we're spending? Because like people constantly say, like, I know that's like kind of like sales pushbacks or whatever, but like it's people constantly say, hey, let me check with blah department. But I'm like, shouldn't you be the decision maker? Like, how do you understand the decision making process at a
Yeah.
C?
Yeah, so for December or actually for a January 31st company, I think you probably kick that process off in September of the prior year for let's say a public company,
Oh.
like a larger organization. The first thing you would do is you'll come up with, what is your kind of overall bookings goal based off, where you think you're going to land that particular period, that particular year. You'll come up with, hey, we want to grow 25%. You'll do some math around how many headcount that'll require in sales, and then do all the mathematics of how many overlays and things like that we talked about earlier. And so you'll have a sales plan by quarter to hit that goal. You'll work with the sales team to make sure that they are participating in that process. Sales planning may report to the sales leader, may report to finance, but you work collaboratively if it reports to the sales leader. Once that's set, which is the first stage, then you say we're gonna invest 25% of our business in R&D. And then you'll say that would be about $12 million of incremental investment for R&D. Let's go out and have the R&D team go through that process of writing those memos describing what would they do with existing headcount and what would they do with that additional $12 million. And then you decide which of the teams you invest in based off how well that team is delivering and what value they're going to add for customers. And then other functions like finance and other G&A functions. You're constantly trying to starve G&A, and so you're just looking at ratios and how to make like a small improvement in percent of G&A compared to revenue each year, and running a little bit more efficiently. And so then you hold a little bit back in reserve generally to allocate throughout the year. And then IT, you're obviously looking at like what are the big strategic delivery items for the team, how much internally team members do we need to deliver that, how much consultants or whatever we need to deliver that. And then, any tool spend, you try to get a understanding of across the business of like, hey, is there any new things that we're going to deliver? And then obviously your cloud spend should be like percent of revenue, things like that.
What's your advice for like a small company founder, like myself, selfishly
Yeah.
asking? So like, how do you think about like how much to spend on technology, how much to spend on like I don't know, relationship building slash dinner, and how much do you spend on like other stuff, like actually creating the products, go to market, marketing, yada yada yada. Like, how
Yeah.
do you kind of like have the ballpark in your head?
Yeah. I mean, I would boil down to two things. Like, what are we going to do to sell the product, and what are we going to do to build the product? And
Mm.
make sure every investment that you're making at an early stage is focused on those two things. Now, it might be a marketing resource that's going to help you sell the product, or it might be a product manager within dev. But I would lean more towards investing in individuals who can code, engineers, and then individuals who can not only sell software, but maybe they have some marketing skills, or like things, find players who can do a little bit of more than their kind of core role, because you have to be very efficient when you're a small organization. And I would say, I know there's always kind of this pressure from VCs to grow as fast as possible, and I would just be super, super careful in understanding the long-term implications of hiring, because when you have to fire somebody and you have to lay out, 6 months of severance or 3 months of severance, and all the implications of like start and stopping, like it's not a good outcome, and it can kill morale. So just be judicious on how much you invest. And don't be afraid to say no to a board member or a VC who's recommending a more aggressive plan that might help them get to some internal target of valuation, but is ultimately not very good for your business, and put you at a higher risk of ultimately going bankrupt.
Totally. Wow. Love that. Okay. I have a 1 minute fire round for you to wrap up. Okay. So what's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Probably Walden. I've read it about 20 times. So thorough.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I say? What was the question? Who would I invite to a dinner party?
Yes.
Oh, never had that one before. Dinner party. Let me think. I'm blanking. Maybe Kissinger. I've read a couple of his books. I think he'd be an interesting guy. Learn from.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Because I'm back to my career. I would probably say Tom Walker, the former CFO of Tableau, kind of mentoring me and helping me get ready for the role.
Where can we find you outside of work?
What was the last one?
Where can we find you outside of work?
I coach high school baseball. I'm on a baseball field or softball. I coach fast pitch too. So I'm on a baseball field or softball field probably 6 out of 7 nights. So that's what I'm doing. And in the summer, I like to fish. So that's, I'm outdoors.
Wow, well-rounded life. Well, Damon, thank you so much for coming to the show. It was such a masterclass for just like financial planning / CFO career. Now CEO, obviously.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed kind of speaking with you, and thanks for everyone who joined.
Okay, let me quickly end stream.